And so, Karl, here's the $1,000,000 question. Do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
Right. So non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
And so, Karl, that is quite a bold statement. I'm wondering, and I'm curious, how confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt.
They straight up asked him, like, are you a first-hand witness?
It's really interesting because I've been to Holloman, and so when I was there, I was like, man, I wonder where this was supposed to be. I was looking around the base.
Those ramifications can totally wipe civilizations within one single human lifetime.
I mean, if we're not broadcasting any radio signatures into space, why do we think someone else is?
You're never going to have people inventing plasma pistols before railroad, right? That's just not going to happen. It's going to follow this energetic slope.
That there's some non-public agreement.
Do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
I can't help but think he's talking about covert agreements with NHI. And I know this sounds absolutely bonkers.
But if there isn't something material that they want, then what the hell are they doing here, right? And that's kind of a scary open-ended question.
Welcome back to Catastrophic Disclosure, where we discuss how the study of UFOs has gone through a radical shift from conspiracy to serious scientific inquiry. I'm Tanvir, a software engineer focused on the artificial intelligence race and how it may intersect with UFOs. And I'm here with Jack, a material scientist who works on hypersonic missiles, and Nest, a systems engineer who builds space probes for a living. Today, we're going to dissect Karl Nell's Bombshell interview at a global investment conference in New York City, and also talk about our upcoming trip to the SCU Conference later this week in Huntsville, Alabama, where Ross Coulthart will be the keynote speaker. So to start, let's talk about the SALT Conference. It seems like every year, Alex Klokas somehow manages to bring on some leading disclosure advocate, and it's always a radical shift in mainstream notions about UFOs. In the previous years, he had Dr. Gary Nolan, and this year he got Colonel Karl Nell, who burst onto the scene after his talk at Stanford, where he explicitly defined catastrophic disclosure, non-human intelligence, and laid out a hypothetical disclosure plan. From my personal experience, I got to talk with Alex at Stanford and ask him what he really thought about the presence of non-human intelligence. But now you have the modernization advisor to the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army saying this as well.
Yeah, I got a chance to speak to Karl Nell at the Seoul Symposium, which was fantastic. We'd spent some time at some of the same contractors in the defense industrial base and had a very, very interesting but very brief conversation. And I think that I have always said when Nell's name comes up and when whistleblowers are attacked on UFO Twitter and elsewhere, you know, what are you going to say about Nell? You know, what about Nell, right? And Gallaudet as well.
I have this trope on Twitter. Every time I see one of these people, not every time, frequently when I see one of these people shitting on Dave Grush, I just like to say, explain Karl Nell. And I'm telling you, I never, ever get a reply. Never.
But I mean, these people have an immaculate record, an unbelievable resume of education. He has a BS in electrical, master's in mechanical, master's in strategic studies, and I mean, the guy's probably sat for 2 or 3 full polys. Probably has had a TS since 2004, and has been on SAPs the whole time, and has just the opposite psychological profile of a liar or a grifter. And I think it, you know. He came out swinging.
So non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
And so, Karl, that is quite a bold statement. I'm wondering, and I'm curious, how confident are you that that is true?
There's zero doubt.
very first question, gave a very simple, direct, pow answer. Interaction is real, interaction is ongoing. Unelected folks in the government know this. Bam, do what you will with it. You know what I mean? It was great. So that was my take.
I didn't speak with him at Seoul, but he was a focal point of the discussion there. I thought he was impressive. And if I had to guess, with everything he's involved with, I think he was in charge of, I'm not sure what it means, but to re-update the infrastructure of the military. I have a feeling that when he was in charge of those satellites, and I think something, I think maybe that's where he started noticing this whole topic. That's just my guess, and it's just conjecture. Who knows? But yeah, he came out swinging.
So I actually have a funny story. I think people know about this because it was brought up on Reddit at some point. But someone at the Seoul Symposium during the lunch break, when you could walk up to these disclosure advocates and talk to them, I talked to Christopher Mellon, and then I eventually made my way to Karl Nell. And there was someone already there, and they straight up asked him, like, are you a first-hand witness? And Nell just looked at them and said, I'm not touching that. And he didn't answer that question. But now you have him at this global investment conference, and his own words are, there is no doubt about the NHI. And so I can't help but think, when you say there's no doubt, that means you had to have had first-hand confirmation, because you can't say that there's no doubt if you were a second-hand witness or if you were a third-hand witness. You can't say that if you heard from someone else or if someone told you something. Like, you had to have seen it. You had to have had direct oversight over this thing. And so I think it does lend credence to the fact that, okay, he is a first-hand witness in my mind, and he definitely had some involvement with the program. Maybe he was one of the whistleblowers that helped Grush to write the whistleblower protections and helped form the UAP Disclosure Act. And maybe he's one of the people that walked into Grush's office and closed the door and said, hey man, there's something that you gotta know. I just have such a strong feeling. And I don't think I'm off base in thinking these things, because this man is out here saying there is no doubt in his mind.
I agree with you. I feel the same. I think he probably must be a first-hand witness. And the fact that I forgot about that story, and the fact that he responded in that way means that it's not a no, right? And there's also a line somewhere from Leslie Kane where she comments on the nature of her conversations with Nell and says that there's like hours and hours and hours of interview recording that she has off the record with Nell.
Yeah.
What would the purpose of that be if he was a second or third hand witness? There wouldn't be that much to say. That wouldn't be that much for him to say to her, if in fact it wasn't his experience. And so Nell mentions in his background, as he gives that spiel about, here's my military career,
I ended up working in Army Space Command. I commanded a satellite ground station, war trace to the Joint Chiefs. I spent some time at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
He says, I spent some time at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Obviously, we all know Wright-Pat has this history of UFO lore and all of that. But more specifically, the thing that's at Wright-Pat that is documentedly there, you can go find it when you look at the combatant commands that are at Wright-Pat, is there's foreign material exploitation work that goes on there that is done in collaboration with the CIA, with Aerospace Corporation, and with other contractors, because this is, of course, a covert activity that the JSOC and the intelligence community undertakes to send special forces troops over into other countries where, for instance, there's Soviet weaponry being used, and they confiscate something like an S-300 or whatever, and they bring it back and they test it and play with it and reverse engineer it. Naturally, it might make sense for somebody involved in FME to be involved in technology of unknown origin, reverse engineering. I mean, the principles of reverse engineering are fairly common. And there's stuff all over this. Radiance is at Wright-Pat. Radiance is in Huntsville. Aerospace is in Huntsville. Eric Davis is at Aerospace. Karl Nell knows Eric Davis personally. He mentioned that at Seoul. Many others have these interconnections with them between FME and aerospace and Wright-Pat,
Yep.
Radiance, Apogee Engineering, all these companies that kind of coalesce into this activity. So I agree with you. I think it's a fairly certain fact that he's a firsthand witness to all this.
What do you guys think is the advantage, excuse me, of Nell not coming forward? And if he has seen something firsthand, why not just say it? Why leave us guessing? Why postpone this disclosure effort, and not tell the world that, well, hey, I saw this under my command. Why would he be keeping that under wraps?
I do think there is some benefit of him not making that explicitly clear. In the same way, at Seoul, when he let out that slide about the hypothetical disclosure campaign or the disclosure plan, he specifically said there's no like solid effort underway here. This is just like a hypothetical way we could do this. And I was having a call with someone who works with investments who was also at Seoul earlier today, and he was laughing to me about this because there is no world where you create this entire timeline, this DoD timeline, you have all of these things laid out, and it's something that is just hypothetical. For example, as soon as you say you're a first-hand witness, all you do is draw nonstop questions, nonstop inquiry, all of this attention that's taken away from the actions they're doing, whether that's whistleblower protections or anything else, because it just draws like this unnecessary spotlight on you. They're being extremely careful. There's definitely a deliberate plan underway, even if they don't want to admit to that. And I think this is all part of it, like not explicitly coming out and saying you're firsthand, just like Grush. At first, he didn't say that he was a firsthand witness, right? Then he went on Rogan, and then I think that's where he admitted that he is a firsthand witness and that he's seen some things. So they're letting out this information when it's most opportune. And so I think there's a lot more to come from Nell and from Grush.
I think there's another possibility too, which is, well, kind of a pair of things. I think clearly Grush's Dopser to discuss and disclose his firsthand experience took longer and was a different sort of process than his Dopser to just discuss with Leslie Kane, to go on the podcast, to say these other things. These were separate levels of disclosure approval. And it's very possible that Nell either has not received permission to discuss those things, that it's in Dopser review. It's also possible that Nell just didn't want to put that large of a target on his back. It's possible that Nell is doing some work. As we mentioned, he is still, as far as we can tell, a civilian contractor for the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. It's perhaps he's been told that role would disappear if he did that. The other thing is that I think that Grush has mentioned that there are sympathizers in the DoD who endorse the idea of disclosing the existence of NHI, but keeping classified the existence of reverse engineering of weapon systems. And Nell revealed perhaps maybe his own perspective on that in his SALT talk when he said, if you think the president should just come out and say there's NHI, well, the problem is that elicits a knock-on list of questions that's not where the conversation can end, because there's a million follow-up questions to that. Similarly, Nell might feel that it's unrealistic to think that he can come out and say, yay, I'm a first-hand witness, and then it's going to end there. Clearly, that is going to elicit an avalanche of further questions, which perhaps I think there's probably, we have to understand that people that work career DoD have loyalty to the notion of U.S. supremacy. So while they may philosophically sympathize with the idea of disclosure, there's going to be a line for them beyond which they think that they're helping the adversary, and they won't cross that line. So there may be people who he doesn't want to burn that bridge with and go too far, but what he's doing so far is not too far. It's just a speculation on my part, but.
And maybe one more reason for not explicitly stating him being a first-hand witness is that other high-level officials from other countries, not the United States, have been saying these things.
So we can look at some folks that have very high level access to information, like Paul Hellyer, who is the defense chief for Canada, has come out and said the same thing. We can look at Haim Eshed, the head of Israel's, or former head of Israel's Space Force, has said the same thing. Chris Mellon, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Intel, SAPCO, has essentially said the same thing. Lou Elizondo has said the same thing. David Grush has said the same thing. David Grush cleared for presidentially level material. So you're looking at people that are in a position to know this, and they're telling you the same thing.
So he mentions, for example, Paul Hellyer, the Canadian defense minister, and he also mentions Haim Eshed, the man who led Israel's NASA, basically. And these are two people who have gone on record and said the most outlandish things, because they're talking about NHI and meeting with them and world governments knowing about this. And at the same time, Nell is being very realistic about our ongoing efforts in science. SETI, for example, is still searching the skies, searching the galaxies for weak radio signals. And he brings up the fact that we ourselves as humans, we've only had a couple of decades where we've been sending out these weak radio signals from broadcast TV, but we're not even doing that anymore because TV is dying and we're moving on to fiber. And so why do we still think that some civilization out there is going to be broadcasting those signals for hundreds of years or something like that? It might also be a blip, just like it's been for us.
It's likely that the universe is full of life. If you look at the SETI program in particular, the SETI program has all the same assumptions that you would accept and probably make with respect to this topic, except that they believe that non-human intelligence is transmitting signals here. But at the same time, like, we're not transmitting signals. SETI doesn't transmit signals, and the only signals that are actually broadcast of high enough power into space for somebody to pick up come from broadcast television and ballistic missile early warning systems, which you could argue our technology is moving away from. We're going to satellite, we're going to fiber. Broadcast TV is a thing of the past.
I think it's just interesting that he's not necessarily throwing shade at SETI, but I think it's more of, we're not looking at the right things, we're not prioritizing the right things. Hey, they're literally right here.
Yes, I think he's hit onto something that SETI has been criticized for before, and in the question of astrobiology and xenobiology and the more traditional circles of sort of looking for extraterrestrial life that are kind of commanded by like the Neil deGrasse Tysons and so on, they do entertain the notion that, like, hey, we don't actually know how long we might be a radio broadcasting civilization. It might be the case that we don't do that very long. And I think we're finding exactly that, even if you have, let's say, these Dyson spheres and Dyson rings are out there, recent study was published showing a whole list of candidates. I'm firmly of the belief that technology follows the path of least resistance, and it seems to follow the path of least energy output, right? So we went from muscle power to metallurgy to chemistry to atomic physics. And you're never going to have people inventing plasma pistols before railroad, right? That's just not going to happen. It's going to follow this energetic slope. So it is very possible that one day we're going to have better ways, faster than light communication, etc. But our command of the electron is so substantial and so sophisticated. Imagine where it might be 1,000 years from now. To think that we would abandon it entirely is probably unrealistic, but that doesn't mean that we'd be blasting these high-powered, inefficient signals into deep space. Therefore, I don't think they will either. In whatever means they're still using electrical communication, it will be short-range, highly complex, highly compressed, highly digitally signed, to sort of facilitate whatever they're doing with it. So I agree with him. He was trying to draw an analogy, I think, and say, well, you clearly don't think it's ridiculous to be listening for signals from ETI. Why do you think it's ridiculous to be looking for craft from ETI? Similar argument. I don't know why he's focusing on ETI in this discussion and why he didn't go with NHI and why he didn't talk about transdimensional. I kind of wondered if maybe he was reading the room and the type of crowd he had. He wasn't trying to go super out there.
I think it's good he brought out SETI. I do wonder if they will change their methods for searching for other life. Um, I can imagine a time, I don't know, in the next decade or so, where they repurpose their radio telescopes to look for, anomalous signatures within our own solar system. Um, I don't know if they could do that to set something aside, but I don't see why we can't look for, technological signatures within our solar system. And I think it brings up a good point. I mean, if we're not broadcasting any radio signatures into space, why do we think someone else is? And there's, if we do send signals, it could be bad too. That then we're basically saying there's something over here. We don't know how other civilizations act. I just think we need to be searching in our solar system, and we just need to be we need to be looking in our oceans, and we need to be searching here at home first before we start looking everywhere else. I think that's the right thing to do.
And as we continue to dissect this talk, another new topic that Nell mentioned that he did not mention at Seoul was this whole concept of the Bronze Age collapse, and specifically the findings in the book 1177 BC, The Year Civilization Collapsed by Eric Klein, I believe from Princeton.
And so as an example of this, I would actually point to something from the ancient past, the Bronze Age collapse. So Eric Klein, Princeton University, 2015, wrote a very interesting book called 1177 BC, the year that civilization failed. And so this is well known to current scholarship. Within a single lifetime, all of the very effective ancient civilizations of the Bronze Age failed due to a confluence of reasons that are not necessarily fully understood today. So we're talking about Egypt, the Hittite Empire, the Minoan Empire, the Manassean Empire, the Babylonian Empire. All these civilizations failed, never to return, other than, let's say, Egypt.
I thought it was fascinating. Initially I thought, is he talking about some ancient contact event or something like that? But I think it's more nuanced. It's more about the catastrophic disclosure and how those ramifications can totally wipe civilizations within one single human lifetime.
Yeah, I found it very interesting because I'm familiar with the book. I haven't read it yet, but I was familiar with the scholarship and the notion of all these civilizations that fell apart around the same time. And he, as he says, we don't really know exactly what happened, but it's believed that there were civil wars and maybe droughts and maybe famines and probably intersocial strife and maybe some kind of pandemic or something like that. And what I found so interesting was kind of two things. Number one, he had all the details of this book committed to memory. He goes, 1177 BC, Eric Klein, Stanford, 2015 or whatever it was. And he clearly had intended to talk about this. And so I kind of wonder if maybe Nell is not defending himself and defending his decision not to disclose by saying, look, there's a risk here of unraveling society, which, one of his most fascinating, most compact discussions of catastrophic disclosure was those 6 things that might prevent the government from disclosing: the fear of consequences of wrongdoing and societal disruption and all that stuff. And Chris Mellon had a talk at Seoul where the high point was, this could potentially disrupt society, but we need to do it anyway. And you can clearly imagine folks in the know having a disagreement on that point and about whether now's a good time, between Ukraine and Taiwan and Israel and the South Pacific, First Island Chain. And the thought that perhaps this is like really the worst possible time to drop that bomb on society and have us all, add that to the soup of shit that we're all sort of sorting through as a society. And so it's almost like he was justifying his decision not to come out and say everything he already knows.
And finally, another sort of bombshell part of this interview is something that he's talked about at Seoul, and that is, how do you disclose this? What are the obstacles in the way? A few of them involve covering up misdeeds, and also if there were covert agreements made.
There's the potential for societal disruption. There's the possibility that there's some non-public agreement. There's the potential for misdeeds and the desire to cover up misdeeds.
Now, here's the thing. I don't really know if this would be a point if it's just covert agreements between government entities, between people. I can't help but think he's talking about covert agreements with NHI. And I know this sounds absolutely bonkers, but I think when you listen to Dave Grush speak in all of his interviews.
Okay. You've stated that the government is in possession of potentially non-human spacecraft. Based on your experience and extensive conversations with experts, do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
And was this documentary evidence, this video, photos, eyewitness? Like, how would that be determined?
The specific documentation I would have to talk to you in a skiff about.
When you listen to Nell speak about covert agreements, and then you sort of piece it together with all of the UFO lore that exists. For example, the story of Eisenhower meeting with the Greys, and he had like a dental trip as like a cover-up. It's easy to just believe one thing or another, but I think there's definitely some truth to this, and the fact that maybe we did make contact, and maybe we made contact in the 50s or the 60s, and maybe the people who made contact are these same unelected groups of individuals that Nell is talking about, who are gatekeeping the very nature of reality. And I think it's fascinating that he goes from talking about this to talking about how the NHI might function, what kind of society they might have. He explicitly states, if the universe is governed by the same laws of conservation, then they could be beings that follow the Darwinian model, beings that follow competition, beings that are competing for resources. And he specifically also states that the only way they're not competing for resources and doing these things is if they live in a post-scarcity world where they have no need for these materials, no need for resources, no need for anything really. They've just transcended. And so what do you guys think about those comments? Is he just putting out some conjectures out there? Or is he speaking from some level of no?
Yeah, it makes me wonder because there's such a long history on the notion of an agreement with NHI. It sounds like a joke, but it's starting to look more and more like The X-Files was a documentary, because Chris Carter spent so much time at conventions talking to experiencers, talking to whistleblowers, talking to leakers. An enormous amount of material from the X-Files storyline has sort of found its way into a lot of the legitimate disclosure information. And one of those things, of course, was a covert agreement to kind of look the other way in the case of abductions, in exchange for technology and in exchange for immunity in the coming colonization event in their storyline. And yeah, I mean, the whole thing about a meeting at Holloman and all that, it's really interesting because I've been to Holloman, and so when I was there, I was like, "Man, I wonder where this was supposed to be." I was looking around the base, wondering, because it's a fairly expansive, empty area. It's right on the edge of White Sands Missile Range, and yeah, it's an interesting idea. Also, I think Eisenhower is a popular figure with like anti-government types and separatist types because he gave that very famous like departure speech where he sort of warned the American public about the military-industrial complex and all that. So I don't know if the origins of the Eisenhower story are somewhere other than that, or if perhaps he's become kind of a cult pop icon with the UFO community for that reason. But it's interesting because you do have these gift stories about, oh, we think that the NHI just landed and left this UFO on purpose, and it was a gift to us. And I've heard other stories about purportedly they welched on the deal and they gave us poor technology and all of that. But Nell's discussion of essentially the anthropology of NHI, what would their civilization be like? What would they find interesting? What would they want? What would they need? Suggests to me that the people on the inside of this in the federal government don't know really why they're here or what they want, and whether what they want is something we don't want to part with. Like, are they underground mining magnesium and silicon and, precious metals because it's useful in their technology, which is sort of very conventional thinking type of resource wars type stuff? Are they harvesting souls? Do they want heavy water? Are they taking parts of the core? Like, who knows, if there's something material that they want. But if there isn't something material that they want, then what the hell are they doing here, right? And that's kind of a scary open-ended question. So
Regarding the some type of agreement being made, it's almost as if I've heard multiple versions of it. I've heard the one with an agreement with the Greys to perform experiments on us. I've heard ones with the, excuse me for sounding ignorant, but the Holloman ones, but they look different. They look like they had weird different clothing. I think Haim is telling the truth when he's saying that there is an ongoing relationship with these beings, and they're conducting experiments, and we actually have people doing experiments with them, not like abduction stuff, but like other things. I just can't help but think, well, are we talking about the same types of beings, or are these all different beings? Because I don't know. I mean, are we talking about the Greys here? Are we talking about, I don't know what the Holloman people or beings are, but I think they had some type of like garments that looked almost Egyptian looking, right? And then who is Haim talking about? Are these the same people? I don't know, but I do think that within 10,000 miles right now, there's probably a human being on board some type of spacecraft that we don't know about, that is probably not really our technology. It's kind of crazy to say, but this, I don't know. But there could be lots of different agreements, is what I'm saying.
See, it can sound so far out there, but you have Karl Nell saying there's no doubt that NHI are here, and he's hypothesizing about what kind of civilization they might have. He's not talking about like, oh, who's piloting these things, and are they drones? Are they unmanned things? He's talking about NHI, the beings responsible for the UAP, and I think we're in such a different place than we were at before Grush and before this whole summer and the Congress. Like, it's actually amazing where we're at. And one of the things that's coming out as a result is we're having a lot more sophisticated science conferences about this. One of them is the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, who does their annual conference, and this one is going to be in Huntsville. So a place we've kind of touched on a lot because it's so connected to NASA, to all of these aerospace corporations, and all of these figures. And so Jack and I, we will be there. It's actually happening a week from now. So we will be there. Again, Ross Coulthart is the keynote speaker, and a lot of the scientists from the Soul Symposium are also there. So we are going to try our best to get some content, to ask some questions, and hopefully get some answers that you'd normally have to wait a couple months before they come out. So look forward to that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this sort of quick discussion on Nell's interview. I think this was also deeply planned. So Alex was there at Stanford. Alex met Nell. Alex already met Nolan. And so I definitely think they're like, okay, well, you're up next, Nell. And I wonder who's up next after Nell. Who's the next disclosure advocate going up there?
Wow.
And so, thank you, everyone, for joining us for this conversation. And we can't wait to have some more content for you guys. So thank you, everybody.